Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch and had good conversations and made some new friends. I feel good energy coming back to us from all you guys. So the morning, I think you got from Jim. We're trying to paint a picture. We don't know if it's true or not, but we as Jim explained, we think there are multiple pathways to accelerating the drawdown of CO2 and putting it back into our ecosystems in a way that's healthy on many different fronts. And as I think you're beginning to understand from the other Chris Nichols presentation and the panelists, we're starting to fill in and buttress all these interrelationships that work together to create a healthy system. And it's humans who have kind of disrupted what nature is trying to do. And if we can get out of the way, or even better, help work with nature, I think we can have a chance to do significant drawdown in the next few decades and help turn around global warming. Adam's going to give you another piece of this, which is the water cycle, which is potentially even more powerful in the short term. The water cycle is very tightly coupled to the carbon cycle. Just one little fact, I think a 1% increase in soil organic matter translates into the capacity of an acre of land to hold another 20,000 gallons of water. And there are also effects in sort of the development of life that interplay. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam, who's our fearless leader, champion of technology when it works.
I think I got it here. Okay. Before I start, just apparently there was some misunderstanding when I said if you donate today, you have an opportunity to double your donation. I didn't mean that there was some mysterious donor back there who was going to match your donation. I meant it was an opportunity for you to donate twice as much. So, yeah, communications are always a challenge. So water can cool the biosphere. Water does cool. Need it louder? Water does cool the biosphere, and we can do that even with elevated carbon burdens in the atmosphere. Of course, we don't want those elevated carbon burdens, but there's plenty of examples of technology saving us. There are plenty of examples of water doing that. And I want to talk to you about a particular hydrologist, a Slovakian hydrologist named Michal Kravcik, who first appeared in Judy Schwartz's first book, Cows Save the Planet. And until that time, I hadn't given much thought to water cycles. I understood that restoring ecosystems needed water, but exactly how the water cycle was kind of a black box for me. And I listened and learned from Michal. I read about him in Judy's book, and then we had him speak at our 2015 water conference. And I was surprised and puzzled because what he said seemed so obvious. I was surprised when he told me that he was an outcast in the water arena among hydrologists, and they all did it differently. And I didn't quite believe it. And then I began to see for myself the puzzlement and surprise among water professionals when I saw him giving his talk to water professionals. And like replacing big concrete dams with little logs and sticks and stones, and playing beaver with mud. That was a pretty strange idea for humans to be doing in the conventional water circles. So at the end of March this year, we had the pleasure of Michal coming back to the US. He did a tour of the Northeast and stayed for a week down in the Boston area, and then flew out to California for 2 weeks, and he brought some water bottles with him so that they could have some water, because I hear they don't have any. Although now that's changed. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about his approach. His approach to water in many ways is tactile. So if you've ever walked from a hot field into a cool woods, you pretty much know what his water paradigm is like. He gets into much more detail, of course, and we'll get into some of that detail. But we all have a visceral sense of how water works on planet Earth. And engineering kind of led us astray. So Michael talks about the new water paradigm versus the old water paradigm. And the new water paradigm says that water falling from the sky over land is a precious gift to terrestrial beings and should sink into a healthy, spongy soil where it lands, never runs off, leaving plenty of water for living things. And of course, we've been hearing that all morning, which is great. And from that simple premise derives an entire paradigm of how so many things work or fail to work in the world. The old water paradigm is the temple of impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces are the foundation of civilizations. In cities, surely, but farmland turns into relatively impervious surfaces over the centuries from mismanagement. Anywhere we build roads and houses, water runs away and creates floods and mudslides, damages crops, kills people and animals. And to add insult to injury, we pollute fresh water with sewage and multiply the urges to rid ourselves of that elixir of life turned toxic. So of course we want to send it to the rivers and to the oceans as quickly as possible. Perhaps this wasn't a terminal problem with the size of civilization in the times of the Mesopotamian Fertile Crescent, although it may have been. But in a very real sense, it was the beginning of the end times that we're seeing today. We can change the story, and we have to change the story, and that's why we're here. But its momentum is nonetheless daunting. The new water paradigm by Michal Kravcik and his colleagues is a powerful anti-daunting antidote. So a couple of quotes from Michal. Paradoxically, the incidence of more destructive and more frequent flooding is preventing people from realizing that their country is undergoing a process of desertification. All those big storms and all that water, that's part of a process of desertification. And within the context of his writing, deserts and semi-deserts can be understood as fully dried out parts of a continent with minimal or no circulation whatsoever of water in what he calls the small water cycle, and we'll get to that. So the new water paradigm, this is a slide that's been up here. Civilization accelerates runoff from land by creating those impermeable surfaces and sending the water away. More solar energy is transformed into sensible heat. That is heat you can feel, and we'll talk about sensible heat, which you can feel, and latent heat, which goes into making water evaporate, which we do not feel as heat, but it is still the movement of heat energy nevertheless. The less the solar energy is transformed into sensible heat, the cooler it is. Keep in mind that a great deal of heat is moved from the surface of the Earth to the upper atmosphere by evaporation and transpiration of water by plants. It takes 540 calories to turn 1 gram of water to water vapor. It only takes 80 calories to melt 1 gram of ice. So that whole evaporative process is a key piece of life on Earth. The draining of land, that is runoff and floods, can be reversed through comprehensive conservation of rainwater, which maintains a sponge-like quality and absorption capacity of soils and maintains many aspects of soil health, resilience, biodiversity, and productivity. Water and carbon go together, but without water, nothing. Renewal of small water cycles over land can temper extreme weather events and ensure a growth in water reserves by eliminating heat islands and the problematic distribution of atmospheric moisture. So there's the old water paradigm. Water's a nuisance, needs to be gotten rid of. New water paradigm, water is an essential asset, and we need to treat it with tender, loving care and kindness, even when it rains hard on us. And we can do that. And here's brief rundown of the allocation of water on Earth. Oceans and seas, 97.25% of the water on Earth. If we get down to the bottom, the biosphere, the water that we need is 0.4% of the water on Earth, and that's what keeps life going. Here's another picture of it. This is just the fresh water after you take out the 97.25% of the oceans, and most of it is in icebergs and glaciers. A quarter of it is in groundwater, a sliver is in lakes, and a tiny bit is left over. Most of what's left over is soil moisture. There's some in the atmosphere, and there's even less in rivers. So this water of life is actually a very, very tiny part of the water on the planet, but gotta have it. So this is difference in management between the new water paradigm and the old water paradigm. With the new water paradigm, you've got these spongy soils, and I said I wasn't going to do that. You've got these spongy soils, and the water mostly goes down to recharge the aquifers, and there's very little runoff. Soil's all staying in place. With the old water paradigm, which is what we have all around us, you get this decreased evaporation, and most of it runs off, and very little goes into the ground. And just to let you know, this is from a book that Michael and colleagues wrote called A New Water Paradigm, and it's available free online. You can download it. It's about 95 pages. You have to think a bit, but it's not hard to understand. So this is the distribution of solar energy, and the sun graces us every day with its energy and heat. And in a drained field, that drained field we were in before we walked into the woods, the heat flux to the soil is 5 to 10%, same on both sides, but the heat becomes sensible heat. There's no water to evaporate, so it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter. On a healthy ecosystem, the heat goes to evaporating water. 70 to 80% goes to evapotranspiration, that is evaporation from the leaf surfaces and transpiration from the leaf undersides, and it cools the biosphere, and we'll have a couple of examples of that. This is an infrared photo on a sunny day in Central Europe, and you can see the red parts. That's 39 degrees centigrade, and that's where you've got the heat being created because there's no evapotranspiration going on. And this is the park, and that's a difference of around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's just right in the same place. So this could all be much cooler, but it isn't, and this is the town square. It's a very nice, pretty Central European town square, but the heat distribution is out of whack. Now, okay, this is my former front yard. I rented, so I'm not responsible for the grass being there. And it was a 90-degree day, ambient temperature, and I took my handy-dandy little digital kitchen thermometer, and I measured the temperature from the asphalt across the lawn to under the bushes. And so here's a little surprise quiz for you. And if you already know this, what do you suppose the temperature difference between the hottest point, and I'll tell you that was here, and the coolest point, which is under there? What do you suppose the temperature difference in Fahrenheit is? Just shout it out. 40, 20, 30, 17. Wow, I like scientific precision. Anybody else? That is a 60-degree Fahrenheit difference. 60 from there to there. 60 degrees. So just imagine what you're doing to the temperature of the biosphere when you do that, as opposed to that.
Where was the grass? In the grass?
The grass was kind of in between.
In between?
Yeah, yeah. It would have been a lot better if it had, had full shade and lots of moisture. So this is what happens in a city. It's an effect. This is what is called the urban heat island. The heat is going up, and you can see the curve goes down as you get into the countryside. And what that does is it creates an impact on the small water cycle. So the small water cycle is the water cycle that happens in a local area. I asked Michael, how small could it be? He said, well, how big is your garden? How big is your yard? How big is your farm? It's the way the water works in any given area when there's plenty of it. And in this instance, in this diagram, there's all this heat going up, and it's pushing clouds and moisture and water vapor away, and it goes to the forest nearby, and it rains hard because it's adding a lot of water to the precipitation pattern here, and then it just runs off in a flood. It's too much for the land to absorb, and we have the beginning of desertification on land. Now, this doesn't happen all at once, and it's not exactly the same every time, but in the aggregate, we've seen plenty of examples of this very thing taking place. When the evaporation and infiltration start to go down, the extreme weather events start to go up. You get these big contrasts in weather phenomena, and I'm just telling you what I know, which isn't very much, but I wanted to communicate the basic ideas.
Excuse me, where is 1 year on the time graph?
It's not in years, it's just the movement of time. So if you are reducing the infiltration and evaporation, it could be 5 years, it could be 100 years, but it's just showing that as the infiltration and evaporation go down, the heating events go up. And you can reverse this too. You can help your soil become more absorbent again, as our farmers have shown us, and restore a healthy small water cycle.
So forgive me for follow-up question.
Now, I'm not going to forgive you, but go ahead.
So it's like we've got excess heat. Where do you want to put it? In the soil or in the atmosphere?
Right.
Okay.
That's what it comes down to.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it's actually not, in the soil, but mostly it's going into dried, desertified soils, and of course asphalt is a very dry, desertified soil.
So, what's good? I lost my concentration. It's good for it to go in the soil if it goes deep, right?
Water?
Yes.
It's good for water to go into the soil as long as it doesn't run off. So you can see a farmer who farms very regeneratively, organically, and right next to a conventional farm. And we saw that in Chris Nichols' pictures, right, of healthy soils. They're like sponges. There's a great little movie out there, and if you haven't seen it, I suggest. It's called Soil Carbon Cowboys. Just Google it, and you see these are holistic planned grazing people. Tell you how they came to it, despite even not believing in it. They didn't feel they had any choice because their financial conditions were becoming so bad that they were going to, wind up flipping burgers. It's a great movie, 12 minutes long, and it shows you another example of, one farm being flooded for weeks and another farm absorbing 8 inches of rain with right away, just goes in. So the other thing that Michael tells us is that the desiccation of the continents, the fact that we're shipping all this water to the ocean, that water actually does not come back onto the land. It stays in the ocean. And as a result, we see 2 to 3 millimeters of sea level rise just from pushing water off of the continents every year. And here are some examples. This is the high tech, human beaver example. And these are done on hills and mountains. And these aren't streams. These are erosion gullies from old roads in Slovakia. And what they're doing is they're putting up a barrier. It's a permeable barrier, but it's a barrier. So it silts up on the upstream side, and things just start to grow. And eventually, it grows over entirely. So here's 1995 to 2009 example, when they're first building it, and then a couple of years later, and then 10 years later, and all of this it's all gone. It's just all what it should be. And here's an example of an urban zone. And this is 1 year from there to there. It even grew a dog. Yeah, that's pretty magical. So, and here's how you do rainwater harvesting in a city. You take the water that comes from the roofs, and you just end it in a pile of gravel, and it infiltrates slowly into the soil. When Michael was here, we went to Winchester, where they're having all kinds of water problems. And something as simple as changing the grade from the center of the road or from the yards or the sidewalks so that the water doesn't run off into the road and go down the storm drains, but you have a swale where the water goes into place and just stays there. And you can also, as this example from Maryland, you can create all kinds of rain capture little landscapes that keep the water on the site and create all kinds of beautiful scenery. Yes?
What's happening in the middle there where the water collects?
Yeah,
Does it just percolate down on its own?
Yep.
There aren't any little
Yep. And that's a rain garden. And people are starting to do rain gardens. In fact, the state of Maryland has a program where it trains people to do rain gardens in their gardens. And they'll come help you set it up. And what?
There's a little engineering involved.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But it's pretty low-tech engineering.
And there's also financial incentive.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
And it has a program called Rainscapes.
Uh-huh.
And there's also the Chesapeake Bay Trust Fund.
Yep.
Both of them give you money to install a rain garden.
All right. I'll do it. Of course, I live in the middle of Cambridge, so it's not going to work. But so that's it. That's how we can change the water cycles, change the temperature of the biosphere, and help things store more carbon as well as keep it cool. And of course, we all like to keep things cool.
So we're running about 10 minutes behind.
So I'm not so cool after all. Sorry.
I have one sort of big picture question that sometimes gets confused. Some people say that humidity is a greenhouse gas. So it's the number one greenhouse gas.
Yeah, water vapor.
Water vapor. Can you
Yeah.
make the distinction between what you're talking about here and how it relates to the bigger climate, the bigger climate cycle?
Jim, you want to say something to that?
Meanwhile, Charlene and the panelists, do you want to come in the front of the room?
It'll be fast. Water goes up. It takes a lot of heat from the ground. Goes up. If you've got a forest around, it's putting isoprene and other terpenes up in the air. It's doing condensation. It falls back, pretty fast. The amount of heat, it's taking heat from the ground and it's condensing up there. It's the same amount of heat, but a lot of that escapes to space. Some of it comes back down, a lot of it escapes to space. So the idea is, like he showed that cycle where the more that ran off, the cycles got smaller and smaller, and you had less and less rainfall. This is a way where the cycles get bigger and bigger, and you have more and more rainfall, and you go through cycle after cycle after cycle.
Give me 1 minute. I want to say one more thing that Jim reminded me of.
Yeah,
Do I still have my mic here? Yes. Okay. Have people heard of the biotic pump? Anybody hear of the biotic pump? Okay, so this is a phenomenon that was discovered in the Amazon, and that is, as an indigenous wise man said, no trees, no rain. And the reason for that is, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that trees and many other plants emit what are called condensation nuclei. So if you have water vapor up there, it's just going to sit there unless it has something to build liquid water around. And those tiny particles, or even small molecules, are called condensation nuclei. Trees put up a lot of condensation nuclei. Some of them are actually bacteria that go up there. So that is a process that builds rain in the Amazon. But when it does that, it goes up and the water condenses, it creates a vacuum. So it sucks water in from the Atlantic Ocean, and it's what keeps the Amazon wet. Now that so much of the coastal rainforest has been cut down, we are losing that biotic pump. And as we can see, the Amazon is drying up and catching fire and all of those things. So it's just, the power of water is amazing, and we're just learning about it, and there'll be more in our compendium.
Has there been any study, like in a small village or in a small town, if we turn the roads from asphalt to well-kept dirt roads, how much will it benefit the temperature decrease?
Yeah.
And my other question is there any other study showing if anything can be done for big desert areas like Sahara to make them into a rainforest?
Okay, so the tricky word there is studies. People do these things, but have they been studied? I don't really know the answer to that. I can give you examples of things. I don't know specifically about tearing up asphalt, but certainly about reviving areas that are now deserts that didn't used to be and turning them into, we've got examples of that. There are plenty of examples of that. But I should leave it to the...
I was just going to say, there is one, if you want to ask me after. We did some work in South America, and I can tell you some examples that we did where the water actually came back up.
Anita is a soil scientist, so you can talk to her. Okay, thanks.